in the last topic, I was trying to make an argument that in Newtonian science, or what we might even call the Newtonian paradigm, the world is a place that runs according to scientifically verifiable rules. And those rules, actually, we can even call natural laws. And the idea here, really from Galileo all the way into Newton and past, is that if we can just figure out what that natural law is, how nature works, then we can predict how nature will work, and then we can in some ways control what's going to happen, right? So the idea here is that Newtonian science gives us the opportunity to think about the future in a way that we never did before. Very different than Aristotelian science, right? Because in Aristotle's time and afterwards, all the way up into Copernicus, you would have to do your work, you'd have to do your logical sort of thinking, and then you would have to look backwards to the ancients. Where Newton says, no, 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 we don't have to do that anymore. We are going to understand more than the people before us did. We are going to, in some ways, progress. As time goes on, things are going to get better and better because we will understand more and more. Now, Newton would have never said that himself. He didn't use the idea of progress in the same way that we would use progress, the way we would talk about progress. But I'd like to argue to you now that, in fact, that Newtonian idea that we can figure out the world, we can predict what's going to happen, and then we're going to be able to control the future has become completely the fabric of our own life. Let me give you an example. In 1980, Ronald Reagan was running for president, and in one of the most famous lines that he used in that campaign, he said, "Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago?" Well, think what that means. It means that you should be better off now than you were 4 years ago. In other words, as time goes on, Reagan was making the point for progress, that just time moving along means that things should get better. Not the same, not worse, but better. Moreover, he was then saying, if things aren't better, then someone in government is holding things back, keeping us from progressing. And Reagan said, so that's Jimmy Carter, you vote for me, and in 4 years, things will be better. And now, ever since 1980, in the United States, somewhere in a political campaign for president, you'll hear that question. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And that underlying assumption is a very Newtonian one, that as time moves, we will know more, we will understand more, we will predict better, and we will be able to control more. And that should be in every area, from politics to engineering, to pharmaceuticals, to philosophy. Everything should get better. What's fascinating, though, is where that comes from, that idea of progress, that as time moves, things should get better. Because it comes directly out of a 19th century thinker called Herbert Spencer, who developed a concept that we now call social Darwinism. And Spencer made the idea, or took the idea of Newton and natural law and said, you know, I bet we can find the natural law of all progress. We can find the natural law for how time works in every aspect of human, non-human, even geologic change. So this is what he said. He said, one, all life is struggle. Life is the struggle for survival of the fittest, but not the way Darwin said, the survival of the fittest species. Rather, Spencer and the other social Darwinists said that the struggle is among everyone, individuals, groups, societies, nations, races. Everything at every level is struggling for resources. And the best fit group or individual will evolve and get those resources, and the less evolved ones will hold back, right? So everyone is struggling, everyone is evolving, even individuals evolve. That's the first idea. The second idea that Spencer had was the government should never take resources from more evolved groups and give them to less evolved ones, because that holds back progress. right? So you should never take from the rich and give to the poor. Why? Because the rich are there because they have evolved more. The poor people have not evolved as much, and so they belong to be there. Now, if they evolve, they'll get rich. They'll be better fit for their societies. But government's job is never to help those people out, because that would be holding back progress. Likewise, individuals and groups should never mix with the more evolved and the less evolved. So if you are part of a more evolved group, Spencer believed that he was, which is to say white, European, and American males, that if you were part of that group, you should never mix with anyone below you. You should never mix economically or sexually or emotionally or intellectually with these other groups. Why? Because they will pull you back. And you know what? They're always going to be trying to mix with you because they want to move up in the evolutionary scale and pull you back, right? So everything is the struggle, no matter what it is. So on the one hand, government should never help. On the other hand, government should make war. Why? Because war accelerates progress. It kills off the people who are less evolved, and it gives those resources to the more evolved. So after he thought through that entire thing, Spencer actually came up with a very thoughtful, though to my mind, absolutely absurd and wrong idea about how time moves, how progress moves, and how evolution moves. So Spencer takes this idea of social Darwinism and he tries to figure out what the natural law is. And in fact, he ends up writing this book called Progress, Its Law and Cause. And so he's developing this idea that progress is part of time. That progress and time go together, that you can't not take one from the other. So as time moves on, progress has to move on too. And he says this happens as things move from the simple to the complex. Here's what he says. It is settled beyond dispute that organic progress consists in a change from the homogeneous to the heterogeneous. Now we propose in the first place to show that this law of organic progress is the law of all progress, whether it be in the development of the earth, in the development of life upon its surface, the development of society, government, of manufactures, of commerce, of language, literature, science, art, this same evolution of the simple into the complex through the process of continuous differentiation holds throughout. From the earliest traceable cosmical changes down to the latest results of civilization, we shall find that the transformation of the homogeneous into the heterogeneous is that in which progress essentially consists. The species, he goes on, as a whole, has been growing more heterogeneous in virtue of the multiplication of races and the differentiation of these races from each other. So he goes on to make a big, long argument about how some races are more homogeneous, other races are more heterogeneous. And he does this in some bizarre ways, to my mind. For example, he makes the idea, the observation that European white men have smaller arms and larger legs as a ratio. So the leg to arm ratio is more different than that of Asian men or black men. And he says, this is proof that white men are more heterogeneous and therefore more evolved. So in other words, if you've got really great guns, right? If you've been working out and your arms are really strong, that makes you less evolved, right? I don't get it. Nevertheless, he's trying to find a reason to show that the groups he believes are more evolved are more evolved. The point here, right, is that he's not just describing a situation. He's trying to predict who's going to win the evolutionary fight, and he's trying to control that evolutionary fight. And he does so by war, by making sure people don't mix, by making sure governments don't help the poor. In all of those cases, he's saying, let the people who don't evolve die off. He says it's just like an old animal that dies off and gets eaten by hyenas. That's better for everybody. If you think about it in a sort of graphical way, you can see it like this. On the bottom of the graph, on the x-axis, we have time. So remember, Time for him, as a Newtonian, is always moving in one direction. But remember that time isn't moving just in one direction, it's moving in a positive, in a progressive direction. We have no control over that, it's just going along. So along that x-axis, time is just moving, 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 moving. At the same time, as time moves, everything evolves. He says, from rocks to animals, from amoebas to societies, everything is evolving. So as time moves, evolution happens. Things get better and better and better. But what we have control of, he says, what we can predict and what we can control is that rate, that slope of evolution. So he says, you want that slope to go higher and higher and higher for your group. And the only way that happens is if you take the resources from the less evolved group. The less evolved group, though, they're always going to be wanting somehow to get the resources from you, either by marrying you or by stealing or by pretending to be who you are. They're going to take those resources from you. So the idea here, and you can see this on the graph, is that the less evolved group is that red line, and they're slowly just going to die away. The more evolved group is going to take their resources. And then in those pink and sort of lighter green lines, you'll see that what would happen if you mixed. He says, Spencer says, if you mix these things up, then the less evolved group gets more evolved, but the more evolved group gets less evolved. And that slows down evolution. It slows down progress. So he has this whole thing set up in a way to show that this is just happening scientifically. This isn't morality, this isn't ethics, this isn't religion, it's just hard science. But that hard science is the underlying theme for a lot of major sort of ideas of social engineering. These would include imperialism, right? Some countries take over other countries. Why? Because they're stronger. But they're not just stronger, they're more evolved. They deserve to take over those other countries, and the other countries or the other races or the other groups deserve to lose. Why? Because they're less evolved. And it's better for everybody if they just die out. Likewise, you can see this, and most clearly, in the eugenics movement that grew up in the 1840s, 1850s, all the way into the 1910s, 1920s. In 1876, for example, when there was the Great Fair in Philadelphia, one of the more interesting things you could see at the fair was a large eugenics display in which it talked about if we would only mate appropriately, we will be able to get rid of all of the bad things in our society, from alcoholism to losing your hair. All of those things would go away if we would just mate scientifically instead of mating for love. So the idea here, right, is that we're going to produce, as they called them, fitter families. We'll produce fitter families by being able to understand the process of evolution, of predicting that process, and also by controlling that process. So what we have here is, at least to my mind, a rather absurd use of Newtonian science. It's not just saying, if you take an aspirin, your pain will go away, and for every 99 people that take aspirin, it happens correctly 98% of the people, so go ahead and take your aspirin, and then your pain will go away. It's not just that. It's not just building another bridge that you know will be stronger because you have an understanding of how steel works. It's not just going on a ship and understanding longitude and latitude. It actually moves into the engineering of human beings, human species, human groups, and human societies. You can imagine that there will be a backlash to this soon.